Earlier in the week, one of my coworkers dropped this box off at my desk, and what did it have inside? Oh yes, an old C64. Just a beautiful Commodore here. This is his own personal unit that has a few problems, like with the power pin and some stuff like that. So he just wanted me to take a look at it and see if we could clean it up a bit, which I'm happy to always work on old 80s tech, so I said yes. So what we'll do here is we'll tear this puppy down, clean it up, and see if we can't get it going. I put it back together enough just to verify that it at least powers up, and we have basic functionality, which we do. You notice we do have the full 38,911 bytes showing up, which means we don't have any terribly shot RAM chips in there, at least not bad enough to fail the self-test. You will notice it is all gray though, which is going to be a bit of a problem. That should be a bright, vibrant blue when it powers up. So I don't know if this TV doesn't like the composite signal coming out from the AV port here, or if we've got something wrong in the video output area. There is a cap around here that got smushed during a previous assembly, and it has some of the bits showing, so we'll definitely want to take that and replace it, and maybe that'll help. Otherwise, I will bring this up to a CRT TV out in the garage, and we'll see if that makes any difference. What I'll do now is give you just a quick tour of the Commodore 64 here then, and we'll tear it apart and start fixing. We'll start off with the power supply here, which is an absolute beast. Not a switch mode power supply like you'd find in a modern machine. There's really no power components in here aside from some conditioning caps and stuff like that for filtering. Otherwise, you just got this guy pumping out 5 volts DC and 9 volts AC running up through here into the Commodore. These are a pretty common failure point. These do seem to die a lot from what I've seen. The only user serviceable part is the fuse. If I remember correctly, everything inside of here is just gooped in epoxy, so you really can't mess with it, which is unfortunate. Here on the right, we've got 2 controller ports. These are for the game controllers. They accept a DB9 connector here, so you can actually use Atari joysticks and Sega Genesis controllers as well, which is pretty cool. We've got our power button here, and then here is the power inlet, which is one of the main parts we have to repair. On the back side, you have a cartridge slot, which most early software was released on cartridge. You've got the RF channel switch and the RF output, which runs through something like this, the little selector. I think I might still have an adapter for those little screw terminals too. Here's our AV connections for composite and stuff like that. This is the serial port, which lets you hook up disk drives, printers, things like that to there. This here is the port for the cassette deck, where you get like game cassettes. I think Commodore had a funny name for that. But yeah, that's where you hook up your cassette drive. And then here is the user port, which was meant to use with modems and printers and stuff like that. This is the business end of the Commodore 64, and there's really not much to it. You've got your keyboard here, which is pretty cool, and then a little power LED just to let you know if it's running. Someone did add these slick diskette labels here with some reference on how to load programs and stuff like that. And then we've got our beautiful Commodore 64 logo there. On the bottom there isn't too much going on. We've just got our cooling vents here, and then of course the cool Commodore 64 sticker. This is where we'll begin our disassembly. You just take out the 3 screws here, and then there's some clasps on the back here, so you just gently sandwich it up and it should pop apart. So with the back screws removed, it actually comes apart real easily. Just got to pull our little LCD, and then the keyboard connector, and that is keyed. Check that out. That's a bundle of wires, huh? And then we'll have a few screws to take off here. And again, this was disassembled when I got it, so there really isn't much here to rip apart. Ooh, check out all that goo. Our first major cleanup task is going to be getting all this thermal goop off. It looks like they just splooged it all over the place, and it's falling between pins and stuff like that. It doesn't measure as conductive, but it's better safe than sorry, you know. You can see here too, it's just globbed on, and at one point just ran down the RF shield, so it's all over the place. I'm sure I can find something much better for that with a modern alternative, and to be honest, none of these chips really need it that much. It's a good idea to have it on the SID and the VIC. These do get a little hot and are known to die over time if they get overcooked, so these for sure will be connected to the R shield for cooling, and then these ones, if I have enough good thermal compound left, we'll definitely goob those up too. Here's the power connector that we need to resolder. You can see it's got a little bit of wiggle to it there, so we're going to get that put back on the board. We've also got the serial and AV connectors that are going to be resoldered as well. I haven't really had any problems with these, but they are kind of loose, so we might as well do it to be safe. You can see here, this is the other issue we need to address. At some previous point, like a past reassembly, someone drove a screw through the ceramic cap, and you can see its innards here, so that can't be good. We'll replace that with a modern equivalent and we'll be fine there. We're also going to check the rest of these little ceramic caps too to make sure they're fine. These don't age terribly bad. The ones you got to watch out for are these electrolytics here. So we'll check these with the ESR meter and make sure they're fine. And we also want to keep an eye on these little tantalums like the guy here. And then there's a little one, there it is, right there. We'll want to make sure those are fine. They don't bulge like electrolytics, so they can be a little trickier. So I started pulling the chips out here, since you can see like here it's actually gotten in the socket with that goop. And then to do that I just use this little guy, just that handy little tool that comes in every cheap PC toolkit that you never use. And it's real easy to use. You just put it underneath each ROM chip, and then you just kind of brace it and give it a little tiny tug. And out she'll pop, nice and straight without any bent pins. Well, there's a bit of an unexpected issue when pulling the chip off here to clean the goop out. Since that goop had gone on after the chip, it actually had oozed into the socket at some point. This is actually after I cleaned the crap out of it, but we were still having some weird, like random characters and stuff on startup, as this is the character ROM if I remember right, so that would make sense. And man, that goop, it was all over the board here before I removed the socket, just oozing out. And you can kind of see that too with the VIC, maybe. There's just a ton of it underneath here. It's really gross. So rather than keep dicking around with this and try to clean it, I just grabbed another socket here, and so I'll solder this in. And this should work much better too. This is one of the double contact ones on both sides, so these tend to get a little better connection as it is. Here's the back of the board where the power connector is, and if you look right here, you can see that little gap there, and that's where the post is broken free from the solder, which is causing it to break connection when we wiggle it there. So I'm going to remove all of the solder from these joints here, and then we're going to put some nice leaded stuff in that should put up to the different temps and stuff a little better. This does look like it's been repaired in the past, but for whatever reason that just didn't stick. So we'll do the power connector, and I'll do the AV connector as well, just to make sure everything is nice and solid. Here's our board after repair. We've got all of the goo removed from the chips, and I've replaced the sockets that had become infected with that nasty stuff. So everything's back and running like it should. We've got the capacitor that was broken replaced up here. And then the power connectors, the AV connectors, pretty much all of the connectors have been resoldered from the bottom, using some really high quality solder, so they're not going to get all jacked up again in the near future, which should be good. Now that we got that fixed up, I figured I'd take you through a quick tour of the Commodore 64 and just what all these chips actually do. It's pretty slick how everything is laid out, and was pretty cool for the time. In the upper left here, we have the CIAs, or the Set Complex Interface Adapters. These were responsible for all the input and output from keyboard and serial, things like that. They have the clock, they're responsible for clock, have a couple of timers, and some shift registers as well. So these are the really important heart of the system for input-output. Here we've got our three ROMs. You've got the basic ROM that contains the basic programming language, which was actually licensed from Microsoft at the time. Your kernel ROM that takes care of kernel functions. Here you've got the character ROM, so this is responsible for creating all the numbers and letters and symbols that the system outputs. That's all stored here. You've got your processor right here, which if I remember right, runs at a blistering 1 megahertz. And then this guy up here is the PLA, or the Programmable Logic Array. This is responsible for interfacing the processor here with the RAM on the system. And speaking of RAM, That's all down here. We've got these 8 chips, which give us a generous 64 kilobytes of RAM altogether. The rest of these, we have some SRAM down here for the video adapter, and then we've got, I think, some like quad switches and some shift registers and things like that. Just a whole mix of stuff. Off to the right here, this is the VIC-2 or video interface chip. This is responsible for all of the graphics on the system, and the system did have some pretty unique graphics at the time. Certainly much better than its predecessors like the Apple II. That's because this chip can actually do bitmaps and sprites, so that puts it way ahead when it comes to game development. The only other really special chip on here is this guy, or SID, the sound interface device. This is what gives it its unique sound. It's a little synthesizer chip that was specially developed, and actually until recently I guess has been pretty hard to emulate. It does 3 synthesized voices, has 4 different types of wave, the, triangle, square, some stuff like that, programmable filters, and a whole lot of other features that really give it an awesome sound. These are actually pretty in demand. You see a lot of Commodore 64 boards show up for repair on eBay that are missing pretty much this and the VIC. And that's also because these chips are prone to overheating, so all that thermal goop we saw is sort of necessary for these 2 guys. The rest of the chips, not so much. It doesn't really operate that quickly, but it is a good idea to heat sink these 2 so they don't die of heat over time, because they're pretty expensive to replace too. Another funny thing with the SID, this was actually designed by a guy named Bob Yanis. I think Bob Yanis, something like that. He actually left Commodore 64 and moved to Ensoniq and worked on a lot of their cards there too, which is pretty cool because like their wavetable cards back in the early PC days were some of my favorite sound cards before like the Sound Blaster AWE32s and the big guys like that really took off. Well, tour's over. I'm going to button all this back up and then we'll see how it operates. I can show you some of the software and what it looks like in action. Here we are, all bolted up, and you can see she's running Jukebox Air quite successfully, and actually got color. And that's because if I wiggle this little 1/8" connector here that runs up to my TV, it comes back. So yeah, good old composite magic there. I gotta get this thing back to its owner, so I really don't have time to do a software overview like I wanted to. But you know what? I got this second Commodore 64 off of eBay that's pretty nuts. She won't even boot up. So you know what? I'll make 2 videos where we get that one going again, and we'll do some software then. Until then, have a good one, and thanks for watching.